Greetings, friends. Juan Angriska here, and this is the weekly Russian Ukrainian War update for the week of September 23rd through September 29th of 2024. And this week we have pretty good solid updates. So let's go into each of them. And first, we're going to talk about where the most biggest changes has happened, and this is in the Vuhledar area. This is where the biggest action has been happening in this last week, and we could say now that the battle for Vuhledar has started, at least officially. Before, when we talked about the battle for Vuhledar, we were talking about the Russians trying to storm Novomikhailivka and Konstantinovka and Vodana and Pavlovka and Prishtichevka. But now the Russians have broken into Vuhledar itself, and a lot of sources are saying that it is almost physically encircled. What do I mean by that? So there's a few dirt roads that lead out of Vuhledar, and the Russians are here. And so there's one road that lets the Ukrainians leave, and the Russians aren't completely closing it because the idea is that while yes, physically encircling a huge group is good, they believe that instead of right now there's probably a couple hundred Ukrainians in Vuhledar, especially, and they're part of an elite, very well-trained brigade, the 72nd Brigade. This is a very well-experienced brigade and has very good troops. Now, they've been withdrawing ever since the Russians broke through on the flanks about 1-2 weeks ago. However, there's still a bunch of them in Vuhledar, and what the Russians want is that they don't want these elite units to hold up in these strong high-rise building areas. They want them to be like, oh, there's one way out. There's still a way out. Okay, let's leave. Because when you physically close all ways out, it's like trapping a caged animal. The animal will go crazy, and it'll be a lot harder to clean the pocket. However, if you leave a small little exit for them, then most people would rather flee than actually stay and fight, because there's now instead of cutting off all options of retreat, you gave them the option to retreat, and a lot of people will rather retreat to fight another day than stay. That's only if you give them that option. So the Russians basically have one little dirt road that the Ukrainians could use to leave, but in the meantime, the Russians are going to be pushing into Vuhledar. So what happened? So we talked, the Russians have, they broke through, once they captured Prishtichevka, they assaulted across, there's like a river right here, and they crossed that river and have now occupied a huge chunk of the fields on the top. They broke through, and then they started advancing to the east and captured a lot of fields to the north of Pavlovka, and captured the main trench network that helped guard Vuhledar in the northwest here. They captured this. Along with this, with the push in the eastern section, we have confirmation the Russians have fully captured the mine number 3 and are now pushing and have also captured this small part of the mine number 1. And most sources are saying now the Russians are something like here. And so with these breakthroughs, the Russians have now with the before when we talked about the capture of Vodana, we talked about the capture of Prishtichevka. Those were stepping stones to encircle Vuhledar, but now they have actually taken the fields that are now basically have physically encircled Vuhledar almost. Again, they left one way out for the Ukrainians. The Russians have also, a lot of sources are saying, have actually officially assaulted Vuhledar and have captured the eastern portion of the town. So this, again, according to the Syriac maps, this eastern part is under Russian control. So they control about a third of the town. So it wouldn't surprise me if by the end of next week Vuhledar will be captured, and that's probably what's going to happen. But then it's like, what's going to happen from there? So the Ukrainians now have a new front line with Bogdanivka and Novoukrayinka here. These are the new. This is where the Ukrainians are trying to set up a new base of attack. The Russians are about 1.5 kilometers away from it, because if the Russians break through here, then they could advance upwards, take Uspenska, and then this cuts off all the Ukrainians that are in here, and this could pull the front up to Uspenska, and then from Uspenska they could then start going and attacking Karakova, which could link up again the Pokrov, the Selidova direction in the Pokrovsk direction with the Vuhledar direction. So they're kind of all linked up, as I talked about last week. But the main question is, how long can the Ukrainians hold the Russians off from Bogdanivka and Novoukrayinka? That's the big question. So right now the Russians are focused on taking Vuhledar. They'll probably take it by the end of next week. And then from that, we'll see if the Russians continue pushing towards the new Ukrainian defense line, which goes something like this. using these 3 villages as the new defenses. The Russians are also pushing between Vuhledar and Konstantinovka. They have captured more these fields right here. They have captured these fields right here. And so they're getting closer and closer to Kateryninivka here. Probably just trying to push the Ukrainians away from this highway, because now they could use the highway to support, because once Vuhledar falls, this could give them a new base of operations to continue pushing, and it will also give them the high ground advantage overlooking this entire area. So that is the South Donetsk front. The Russians are slowly but surely, the battle for Vuhledar itself has started, but you could kind of say that it's been going on for like a year and a half now. But the Russians are finally in the city. They have basically encircled it, and with its fall, will give the Russians a good opportunity to continue pushing towards Kharkov. There's been no real changes in the Zaporozhye direction or the Kherson direction. However, some rumors are swirling that the Russians have a big army group in Zaporozhye and are planning on attacking north, which is a which I think can happen once the Russians have success in the Donbass, because then they want to pull the front upwards and keep the front stable. So I could definitely see that as a possibility. Let us now go to the Pokrovsk direction, where there's, as always, this is where usually a lot of the action happens, but Vuhledar kind of took the scene from him this week. But the Pokrovsk direction still had a lot of gains. So we talked about the fall of Ukrainsk last week and all that, and the Russians are now expanding from Ukrainsk to take the next. Last week I talked about what the Russian goals are. I talked about. If you look at the video last week for my explanation, but basically they're going to use these rail lines to try to reach Bersky here, and then from here they're going to try to reach the village of Ostrivka here. From these point, if the Russians are able to do those 2 things, then this entire group in Gernik, Kurakovivka, and all these big mining complexes will be surrounded, and they cannot retreat. So, and in order to do that, right now the Russians are stormed Hostra and took it, along with the prison colony. Right now they're trying to storm Maslimanovka, and that's the south. However, in the north, the next thing they need to take is the village of Tesorin. I don't know how the fuck to say it. It's like a weird pronunciation. Looks like, yeah. Anyway, they're trying to storm this village, and while the village is still under Ukrainian control, the Russians are slowly putting the grips on it by, again, doing the try-and-shoot tactic of surrounding it on all sides. So first, in the north, the Russians have fully captured the old abandoned Selidova mine, this area right here, and they have reached the rail line in this area. So they have reached the northern, reached the rail line in the north of Tesorinivka here. However, not only that, the Russians are going to use this to encircle Selidova. So, the Russian, I'm going to talk about this in a moment here, but, if they could use this rail line to get behind Selidova and, reach Vyzhenivka here, and then they could cut off the Ukrainians in Selidova. And what has happened so far is the Russians have, after the capture of Ukrainsk, they captured the fields between Mykolaiivka and Ukrainsk, but now they're going to the very south of Selidova, and they have actually captured this area as well. So they are now right on the southern outskirts of Selidova, and I'm expecting they'll probably continue trying to push along this rail line towards this village right here. If they could capture this village, this gives them a solid area to get behind Selidova. So a lot of now the Ukrainians basically was the gateway to start encircling the Ukrainian grouping in Gernik and Kharkov, but also to encircle Selidova, which is needed to start moving towards the southern part of Pokrovsk. Also in the south, the Russians are storming another old mine, this area right here. A lot of sources are saying this mine has either been fully captured, or some Ukrainian sources say it's only been partially captured, but basically this will say that, let's just say this mine has been captured. Right now it's not 100%, but it's mostly confirmed that this area has been captured. So this now the Russians are in the north, and the Russians are in the south here. And in the next week, the Russians will probably storm Tuskarivka and at least take this area. The hardest part is probably going to be trying to clear these mines these farms and everything. But I think what they're going to do is the Russians will capture the town itself. They might not take the farms. They might then use the mine to go to the west here, take Krymina and Balka, and then they could put the squeeze on it from north and then from south, and then clear the farms that way. And then once that happens, they'll continue pushing towards the next goal, which is Nova Solidivka, which is the last thing they need to do before they could reach the southern part of the northern part of Karakova. So that is what's happening in Ukrainsk. They're slowly, putting the pieces in place to encircle Slidova. They are putting the places to take to Toskrivka, which is the first step towards the encirclement of this Ukrainian grouping in this area. Also, a lot of sources are saying that the village of Zelana Druva has been captured by the Russians, and that the more fields in what they call the Nevsky pocket has been taken. Specifically, this area right here has been taken by the Russians. We still don't have any geolocated footage of anything here, but it does make sense because, the Ukrainians know that the Russians are, pushing towards, Ostarivka here, and they are also trying to push here. So, obviously keeping Ukrainian troops here was they're slowly withdrawing. They could give up the fields because it doesn't really make any sense anymore. Because not only that, they can make a semi-encirclement of the fields here. They can move from Krasnogorivka and Zelana Pershi and meet up and encircle the Ukrainian grouping in these fields. So that's why the Ukrainians are giving up these fields and retreating to Gernik and Krakowa, where they can make a better final stand. And then if we continue going to the northern part of the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are actually making some solid progress in the Pokrovsk defenses itself. In Novoigorivka, the Russians have pushed. We talked about how they captured this Terrakon last week, I believe, but the Russians are continuing pushing westwards and are, have captured some fields to the west of Novoigorivka and are right in the outskirts of Sushka Yar and Listivstika here. So we actually have geolocated footage of the Russians being in this area. So I don't know how much more the Russians have advanced. Maybe they have captured Sushka Yar. Maybe they are, in some of these buildings in Lishtivka. But it definitely seems like they're trying to push away from Novoigorivka and also try to encircle Slidova from the north here. So right now, Novoigorivka is going to be the kind of the center of operations. It was captured intact, and it'll be used as the supply base to attack Pokrovsk and Minigrad. One thing I will say is that, while we have geolocated footage of the Russians being right here, basically, this area right here is a bit of in the gray zone. I don't know if the Russians are in control of this, this Terrakon. I think it is still under Ukrainian control. So I actually think the front line is a bit more something like this. And this area, this area is under Ukrainian control. That is my guess, because I feel like we would have seen some more geolocated footage of the Russians being here by now. So, but we don't have any geolocated footage of Ukrainians being here. But my guess is this Terrakon is still under Ukrainian control. However, this Terrakon is definitely under Russian control, because we have geolocated footage of the Russians having their flag be here. So, because that would explain that, how the Ukrainians are able to hold off the Russians from the center of Selidova. In this direction, the Russians are continuously gnawing through the Minigrad defenses. The Ukrainians, as we talk about, have all these giant trench networks here. They have a bunch of trenches that are in the south of Minigrad that are trying to hold them off from reaching the southern part of Minigrad. Because the first step to taking Minigrad is to take this southern section right here. And the main defense of that is this giant mining complex right here. However, they don't want them to even reach that. They want them to hold them off in the fields here. However, the Russians, after the capture of Gridivka here, are expanding westwards on the northern part of the Zhirogaka River. And we talked about how they entered Mykolaievka last week. And now they have captured a lot of the fields to the north of Mykolaievka and have taken this trench network. We could see it right here. They captured this trench right here. Along with this, a lot of sources are saying the Russians are storming this trench right here, which would make sense. And basically, all the big trenches that the Ukrainians set up to hold them off from Minigrad are falling. And Mykolaievka has basically been taken. There's still some areas right here, and everything. But my main I don't know if this is a rail line or not. I think this is a rail line. Maybe like it splits in two or some shit. I don't know. But in any case, the Russians are basically trying to clear the trenches to the south of Minigrad, and if the Russians could clear, something like this, right, then the Russians could then start beginning their assault operations towards Minigrad. They'll probably continue using this rail line to continue moving along, and then try to enter the residential areas and start battling for this mining complex right here. Yeah, so that's the Pokrov's direction. Slower gains than we're used to, but this is how the war usually was fought. No big breakthroughs like before, but still gains for the Russians. In the Touretsk direction, the Russians, we talked about how the Russians have broke through into Touretsk itself and are now battling for the center citadel and everything like that, and that is still going on. And the Russians are still making gains, but no big breakthroughs this week. But the gains are still coming in. The Russians are consolidating in the eastern part of Touretsk. They have captured this area, this residential area, which makes sense. They want to, I think they kind of moved along the highway and assaulted the center citadel, and so they're kind of trying to secure their flanks a little bit. They captured this area right here, but they also had to secure the prison colony, and they had to, expand a little bit there. So they're trying to secure their flanks a little bit. They're, control this residential area, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians are continuously advancing, trying to reach maybe this road and try to capture these residential areas as well to secure the northern flank here. But they've captured some more residential areas in the north. They also captured more areas in the south here. So they've captured this residential area. They also captured the very important Terrakon, which gives them a little bit of a small high ground advantage in this area. The Ukrainians have a bigger Terrakon, but this gives them the control over, in this area. But this Terrakon was a bit of a pain for the Russians because they had to capture it in order to continue advancements into the center of Touretsk. So small gains in the Touretsk direction. The Russians are now pushing in Nipalivka. We saw the Russians disembark troops in Leninivka, but we didn't have any more geolocated footage this week of how much more progress there is here. But some sources are saying that the Russians are going to continue pushing from New York and have captured the center of Nipalivka here, and now only the northern part of Nipalivka remains, which makes sense. If the Russians are battling for this micro district right here, then they want to pull the front up here. And yeah, so in the Touretsk direction, the Russians are making small progress. They are still, my guess is now that the Russians will try to link up with the troops here and try to capture, probably everything to the east of this main highway that splits this micro district in half. So this area could be captured by the Russians. And from there, the Russians will probably also try to focus the north here and secure their northern flank as they assault the center of Touretsk. Because once the center of Touretsk falls, then they could then get to the back of this giant mining complex, these Terrakons, and then by then, hopefully, the hope is that the Russians pushing north from New York along this rail line could then attack it from the south here, and then take the last Ukrainian defense here, at least the biggest defense. Because after that, the Ukrainians could still fall back to here, to some of these small mining Terrakons here, but at that point, the Russians would have controlled like 85% of Touretsk, and the battle for Touretsk would have been mostly over by then. So the Ukrainians really need to hold on to this main mining district right here. In the Chasiv Yar direction, there's been some small gains, mostly in the north here. Most sources are saying that the Russians have captured Gridivka, that they've captured at least the center part of this this village right here, and that the Russians are pushing along this the canal here to capture more of just kind of use the canal as a natural defense in the west here. But Gridivka has not completely fallen, but because there's like this entire area is kind of Gridivka, but the center of mostly a lot of the buildings has been captured by the Russians according to some sources. So I don't think we have geolocated footage, just a lot of like mappers saying it's true. So I think we're going to need more confirmation, but it does make sense. It looks like the Russians are trying to secure their flank here, and the goal obviously is to kind of have something go like this, secure, capture this village and have a better position in the north here, because the Russians are also pushing in the north here. because in order to encircle Chasiv Yar, from the north at least, they need to capture this quarry, this area right here. And, they want to be sure to put as much pressure on this quarry as possible. The Russians have also have completely captured Kalinova. We have geolocated footage of the Russians basically capturing this area, and basically all of Kalinova has been fully taken. Before they captured the things on the eastern part of the canal, but now they have captured Kalinova on the western side of the town. They have a small foothold here. But now, the Ukrainians are on the high ground in this quarry area, so it's going to be a lot harder for the Russians to assault it. So that's the thing. The Russians are improving their northern advances in Chasiv Yar, and in the last 2 weeks, again, they actually improved their positions in the southern part of Chasiv Yar by taking everything on the other side of the canal here. And, so they're improving their flanks by a little bit because the battle for Chasiv Yar is going to be very, very bloody. No changes in the Severus direction. Just kind of the same things as last week. In the Liman direction, just some clarification. We talked about the fall of Makiivka and Nevsky last week, how the Russians were able to advance into it. And most sources are now saying that they have completely cleared the Ukrainians in Nevsky and Makiivka and have cleared all the fields that are between Makiivka and Nevsky, which is very good for the Russians. They have basically now have moved along this and are securing their gains in Makiivka and Nevsky. The good thing about Makiivka is that they also have a small bridgehead on the other side of the Zhirobets River now as well. From here, the Russians will probably continue going along the Zhirobets River here and continue moving south towards Novozodonovka here. Some sources are saying they are also going to try to storm Lobovka here and try to have another bridgehead on the other side of the Zhirobets River. So try to capture this village. But my guess is that they're going to continue moving southwards here towards Terny and Yampolovka and Turetska here to try to cut off, attack them from two sides, and then have the front line go along the Zhirobets River. So the Russians have now a new positions here. This is a good, solid gain, but it's just a first step for them. In the Kupiansk direction, the Pashana flower is blooming, albeit a bit more slowly. We have the Russians advanced here and are now. There was some footage of an alleged giant attack from Pashana. The Ukrainians posted. The Russians were trying to do this giant assault towards Klestonivka and Kortolivka. That's where they said the Russians were trying to attack, but they said they got repelled. They actually showed some footage of destroying some Russian vehicles. So looks like the Russians will try to storm, or are gonna. But according to the Ukrainians, these are the two villages that the Russians are trying to storm, and which makes sense. So, looks like they got repelled this time, but I think the Russians are now more confident in their Pashana flower to now assault these two towns directly, and then they could have a solid position on the Oska River here. So small gains in Pashana, and looks like the Russians are now finally going to start storming these two towns to reach the Oska River and split the Kupiansk and Liman directions. In the Kharkov direction, we actually have some changes here. This area has been kind of static for a while. However, we have some geolocated footage that the Ukrainians have recaptured the aggregate plant. This is the factory right here. This gave the Russians a position along the Vuhledar River, but it was given up because of supply issues, and now the Russians are back in the northern part of Vuhledar. And however, if we look at footage, Volchansk has been razed to the ground. There's nothing left here. Everything has been reduced to ruin. But the Russians have been bombing this plant. So the Ukrainians have recaptured this plant, and the Russians have fallen back to the north here. That's in Volchansk. Just a little change there. In the Kursk direction, the Russian Kursk counteroffensive has slowed down, and it's so the Russians are, from what most sources are probably saying, along this area, Duranov, Vuhledar, so it's kind of like the Ukrainians are trying to hold in Lubovka and sort of this area right here, because if the Russians break through here, this could very much endanger the Ukrainian grouping in the north here. We actually have geolocated footage of the Ukrainians still battling for Olegolovka here. This is their last position around Karanova. They really want to hold on to it because they want to have a position to assault this town. But right now, they have like one lifeline along this road here to support it. And if the Russians break through Lubovka or Stadanovka, which is where the main battles for this position are going on, then they could cut this highway. And that will really threaten the Ukrainians in Olegovka. But so far, the Russians, this is where the Russians were last week, and they're kind of still battling for these two villages. So, and then here, the reason why for this slowdown is that the Ukrainians are trying to attack the flanks of the Russians here. And so, we have some geolocated footage of the Ukrainians finally capturing Visola. We have geolocated footage of them being here. So, Visola, which is a solid position for them to be in, but it's not the main goal. The main goal was the town of Gluzhovka here. This is where the Ukrainians actually want to push towards. And, so Visola was the first step to push towards Gluzhovka, but because then if they could capture this town, they could cut off the supplies of the Russians attacking towards here, and, they don't want to, that's what they want to at least slow them down. And Visola was the first step. They managed to take it, but again, the main goal for the Ukrainians was to take Gluzhovka here. So, small gains there. So, the Ukrainians are making small gains here. The Russians are making small gains here. However, in the Suchka direction, there's been a big calm in the fighting here. The front line is still kind of stable the way it is. However, in the southern part here, the Russians have fully captured the village of Borky. I think we went over that last week. But they're now trying to push towards Pilanovka here and trying to make the front line go along the Pisky River here. And this gives them a solid defensive position to start, maybe breaking through the Pisky River and trying to encircle Suchka and link up with the Russians here. We talked about this last week, but we actually have geolocated footage of the Russians being in Borky. So, that is what's happening on the ground. Zelensky is obviously in America right now, talking about his peace plan, and yeah, so that is the political situation. Obviously, the demands of each side is something each side cannot accept. So I don't think peace will be coming. So that's the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed what happened this week. Be sure to like this video if you like this. This weekly update. Be sure to subscribe to my channel to continue receiving these weekly Russian Ukrainian War updates, and comment your thoughts of how this war is going. So aim high and wander on.